Good evening, everybody. I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about something that, when you hear it, sounds absurd to some, and it's become mimetic in how far the saying has spread, to the point that I think a lot of people have overlooked the fact that it is a real thing. I'm sure that everybody, whether they've watched a Batman movie or not, has heard about people who want to watch the world burn. And I think too few people actually understand that that is a real and serious thing that a number of people and groups actually feel. So today I wanted to talk about a few of those. While the reasons for people having that feeling, I'm sure, are as varied as any other belief structure, I'll talk about a few that I've encountered personally, so that I can have a bit of a more actual framework to come from. And there are four main groups that I want to talk about. Some of them are going to be more disturbing to hear to listeners than others, especially those who follow certain popular religious groups. The four things that I'm going to talk about are the groups who look towards the world burning or humanity being destroyed in general from either a organized religion perspective, a perspective of a cultish belief or a minor or new religion, those who look at it from an anarchist perspective, or at least an anti-organized government perspective, and those who look at it from the perspective of the lost cause. Starting with the most widespread that I've encountered, those religions who view the end of the world as a positive thing. Obviously, and if you haven't clued into it by now, the Abrahamic religions that are very prevalent not just in the United States but across the globe have a very specific view of the end of days, Armageddon, as a positive thing, because it brings upon the second coming of whichever version of their God they view. And for some people, that's going to be very offensive to be told that they are part of a religion that looks forward to the end of the world. And to those people, I would say, try a little self-examination and accept what your religion focuses on. Christianity in particular, since that's the one that I have the most experience with, growing up in the American South, buckle of the Bible Belt, you encounter a great many people who focus more on the end of the world than they do on the present world. Christianity has been accurately called a death cult by some people, and I say accurately because for certain groups of Christianity, the focus is on death, not on what you do during your life, but on spending all of your time preparing yourself for what comes after death. I have difficulty reconciling that focus on death with being focused on making sure that people have a positive and a meaningful life. Unfortunately, there are those in that group who take it to the more logical extreme, that you should not only focus on life after death, you should focus on what comes after the end of the world. You focus on the fact that because the end of the world is planned and it's ordained, that nothing that happens in the current world matters. You see a number of people using this as an excuse not to worry about things like climate change or any other events that seem more far off than tomorrow. They're not concerned about making the world better through their actions, through their votes, through anything long term. And they're satisfied with that. And it's concerning. I can understand how that viewpoint would be very appealing because it removes a great amount of responsibility from you. But it essentially means that you've given up on making the world a better place because you don't see any point to it. And that means that you don't see any point to making things better for people around you, because in your viewpoint, they should just be preparing for death and the end of the world. There are more of those than I think a lot of Christians would like to believe. Obviously, that doesn't represent all Christians. There are a great many Christians who focus all of their time and attention to making the world a better place for themselves, for those around them, for their future generations. And some of them do it to the point that they mentally break from the strain of trying to make things better. And I applaud them, and I'm thankful for them every day. But you've got to deal with the other side too. Because of my belief differences, I'm not usually viewed as somebody who's allowed to speak on that. So I would ask the Christians to manage your own. And I've talked about that one for quite a while, because they are the largest group that I've had to encounter. Secondary group, and again, consider these minor cultists. They're groups that don't tend to be large enough to have a widespread influence beyond a local level. Local usually being related to a single town or city, or a subset of towns and cities surrounding it. Very rarely outside of the state that it originates in, with the exception of those that focus on establishing online content, in which case they tend to be a much wider, though seemingly more fragmented group, because without that face-to-face contact, it appears to be much more difficult for some of their leaders to have as much of a pull and hold on those who listen to them. There are two groups that I've usually seen this with. Less often or less frequently would be those who view the end of the world as a positive thing, either because it's going to allow humanity to move into a new state of life, similar to what you see in some of the Christian groups, or because they view the end of the world or the end of humanity as a positive for the universe as a whole. And I'm going to talk more about those types of groups later. More often, though, I've dealt with those who view the end of humanity, the end of the world, as a positive thing, because they believe that they're going to be the ones to raise society from the ashes after everything burns down and create a better world. It's essentially a type of Messiah complex, where they believe that they're the ones who are going to lead humanity into a brave new era. Though there's usually very little, if any, type of plan about how that's going to happen, other than they're the special one. The death rate of those groups tends to be a little high. I'm not sure what else to say about that, other than they don't usually seem to last very long. And I can count the number of groups like that I've encountered on my fingers, but not on one hand. And there are times that I wonder if it's something that's unique to the Southeast because of the high focus that people here have on needing to believe something. Some of these individuals were definitely disillusioned with the belief systems that they were raised in. And it's possible that they needed to find one that they could latch onto, whether creating it themselves or latching onto somebody else's. And as somebody being raised in a very religious environment, I have definitely had that feeling. And I understand that feeling, the need to believe something, because you've been raised with the expectation that there has to be more to the world. And it creates a very dangerous trap that people who have been disillusioned with one belief system can fall into, because they still have that need to believe in something more. Not much else to say about those either. There are a lot of people who believe that they are the end-all be-all future of what will make humanity better. And there are those who rally behind them because of a need to believe. The third group, I consider them anarchists, though I'm not completely sure if that's the right word. I'm sure somebody will correct me if I'm using it incorrectly. But there are those who believe that large organizations of humans is an unnatural state, that people should be completely self-sufficient and not dependent on others, and that becoming beholden to any large organizations, especially from a governmental perspective, whether it's at the level of county, state, country, from a United States perspective, is a negative impact to the individual human. They're focused solely on personal freedom and personal choice, to the point that there is no concern for the larger group of humanity. And in their perspective, seeing all governmental organizations, all types of country affiliations burnt to the ground so that people are forced to start from an individual perspective is a positive thing. And this isn't to speak towards those who believe that governments overreach themselves and that it will be better if people were able to organize and manage themselves on a smaller, more community level. This is speaking to those who want to see it all burn, all of the organization. They want people to go back to an individual level and manage themselves on an individual level. Never seemed like a very realistic view to me, and it seemed more of a self-serving manner of saying, I believe that I'm going to be the top dog if these laws, these organizations weren't in my way, and I want things to evolve to that level. Those have been the types of people that I've encountered who had that viewpoint. The ones who think that when everything burns to the ground, they're instinctively going to come out on top. And that makes sense because obviously if you're an individual who, like many humans, benefit from the larger organization of a society that is created to make sure that those who are the biggest and the strongest or have the best tools don't subjugate those below them, you benefit from that organization. If you thought that you were not that person, it's unlikely that you would think that that type of lawless, self-serving, individualistic setup on a global level would benefit you. Not as many of those that I've encountered, but there is something very specifically concerning about them that I have to talk about. And I'll talk about that in the closing because they all tie into the same issue that I have. And the last group is the group who is quite happy, content, willing, and hopeful that humanity will burn itself to the ground because they don't think humanity needs to exist. They've completely given up on any hope that humanity will become better than what they are, that they can't become better than what they are because they're inherently flawed. And the interesting thing about them is that they come from a wide range of belief structures, and many of them carry parts of that belief with them. There are a number of Christians in that group who still consider themselves in some way, shape, or form to be Christians. But instead of looking towards the end of the world as the second coming of Christ or moving humanity into a positive afterlife, they view it as a cleansing of imperfect creation with no hope of redemption. No heaven, no hell, just it's an experiment that was started and needs to be stopped because it failed. And of all those groups, they are probably the most concerning to me because they have no concern of there being an aftermath to their actions. In fact, their focus is on ending humanity full stop. Whether they believe humanity is just irredeemably flawed or because they think humanity is just screwing things up too much for the rest of the planet or the rest of the universe. the end result tends to be the same, that they don't think people should be here. And I speak to these four groups because, again, I've encountered people from these four groups, and at some point in my life, I've been part of all four. Reconciling the feeling that it's better to end it all with trying to make the world a better place is not an easy one. And looking at the rampant selfishness and violence that people perpetuate day after day can make it very difficult not to slip back into that mindset. And it's something that is often deterred not through my own thoughts and actions, but through watching the actions of those who push to make the world a better place. Because I've seen firsthand what people who plan destruction without an exit strategy are capable of doing. It takes a very cursory view of the terrorist actions over the last 50, 60, 70 years across the globe to understand that when a person believes that destruction is the best course of action, that they can cause devastating amounts of destruction on their own. And for a planet of 7.5 billion people, it doesn't take very many people focused on absolute destruction to cause massive amounts of devastation. Wars have been started with single deaths. And it's not difficult to see how those who want to watch humanity burn to the ground could set whole countries on fire with their actions. That's the biggest concern that I have out of all of these groups, is that it takes so little for one person to cause massive impacts to many, many people. And it's horrifyingly difficult to stop it. To see them for what they are ahead of time and shift the tide before it comes to that. The best that I can do is say to focus on your internal issues. What keeps you from thinking that the world should be a better place or doing what you can to make the world a better place? Because the biggest impact for me, and for some of those others that I've seen who have made their way out of that mindset, has been those that lead by example in showing that people are worth fighting for, to the point that you may sacrifice your health or your mind or your body in the pursuit of making things better for others. Seeing people with that drive and that willingness to give up everything for people around them that they don't even know, instead of focusing on their individual selfish desires, makes a huge difference in telling that people are worth saving, that the world doesn't need to burn, and that we need to do what's necessary to put the fires out so that we can all grow into something better. This has definitely run a lot longer than I thought it would. But if you've made it this far, thank you. Hope you have something to think about that will be helpful, that will help you see those who need to understand that people are worth saving, and to give them an example of what that means. Again, this is just something from my experiences with those who look at the world and think it should burn. Just a few more lengthy thoughts from an insane bookworm. Thank you for listening, and be good to each other.